President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has won an election runoff to begin a third decade in power. Turkey's long-serving leader won 52% of the vote despite facing the biggest challenge to his rule. His rival Kemal Kilicdaroglu called the election unfair without disputing the outcome. He'd promised to restore democratic norms if elected and increasingly veered to an anti-migrant platform in the final days of campaigning.
Undefeated for 2 decades. Now, Recep Tayyip Erdogan has been elected to a third term as president. Speaking to thousands of his supporters outside the presidential palace in Ankara, Erdogan said Turkish democracy was the real winner.
85 milyonun tamamı kazanmıştır.
No one has lost. All 85 million people have won. As a result of the responsibility given to us by our people, we are not offended, resentful or angry with anyone.
Öfkeli değiliz.
As news of Erdogan's victory emerged, his supporters erupted in jubilation.
We are very happy. Thank you, God. Erdogan is a world leader. There is nothing else to say.
It was no easy win for Turkey's longest-serving leader. Challenger Kemal Kilicdaroglu did well enough in the first round earlier this month to force a second vote and narrowed the margin in the runoff.
My real sadness is about the difficulties ahead. But I want you to know that we will be the first to stand up to these problems.
Erdogan's opponents fear the populist leader will crack down even harder than before on dissent.
I don't want to live in Turkey anymore. The elections were a choice between a republic and a form of monarchy. And I guess the people chose a monarchy.
Liberal critics accuse Erdogan of concentrating power in his own hands and imposing even stricter religious values.
Let's cross over to our Istanbul correspondent, Dorian Jones. What does Erdogan's victory mean for Turkey's future?
Well, I think President Erdogan will see this as a massive mandate for more of the same. He will continue, as expected, to further centralize powers around himself, allow him to carry out his vision of making Turkey a great power, more massive infrastructure projects in the country, probably more further conservative policies being introduced into the country, given he controls the parliament as well, and a more robust foreign policy, further standing up to Turkey's traditional Western allies, and taking a more nuanced approach with deepening relations with countries like Russia. For his opponents, they will fear more authoritarianism, they claim, further crackdowns on dissent, and a fear for the very future of democracy. And Erdogan has really inherited a country that remains deeply divided as ever. The country split almost down the middle with 52 versus 48%. There is a deeply polarized country, and the early signs from President Erdogan is that this will not be bridged easily.
And then there are Turkey's economic woes. The currency, the lira, slipping towards a new record low as Erdogan claimed victory. What does that tell us?
Yeah, that's going to be probably Erdogan's major challenge when he is back in the office. The lira is at record lows, and that's because Erdogan has doubled down on his unorthodox economic policies of using low interest rates to combat high double-digit inflation. And the fact that he used the last of the country's meagre foreign reserves to defend and prop up the lira in the run-up to the election, there is deep concern that Turkey could be facing a major economic crisis. As one analyst says, Turkey's in the unenviable position of low interest rates, high inflation and little foreign currency to defend the lira. This is going to be Erdogan's next major challenge, and it's going to prove to be expected to be a very formidable enemy, the international markets.
Now, his rival Kilicdaroglu is urging supporters to keep the struggle for democracy alive. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, the opposition really are in somewhat of disarray. They really saw this as their best chance to remove Erdogan from power, and they again were defeated. I think questions over the future of the main opposition leader, Kemal Kilicdaroglu, will be in question. But at the same time, they know they are facing major challenges ahead, because next year there are new elections for the control of Turkey's main cities, and Erdogan made it very clear he is eyeing taking back power in cities like Istanbul and Ankara. And for the Istanbul Mayor Ekrem İmamoğlu, he is expected to be under a lot of pressure given the fact that he has this recent prosecution and conviction for insulting an official. He could face possible jail there. So the very future of the control of Istanbul is expected to be the next major battle the opposition will be facing.
And briefly, Dorian, what do you think 5 more years of Erdogan will mean for Turkey's partners abroad?
Yeah, Turkey's Western allies will be, I think, quite concerned. Erdogan has taken a very robust stance towards his allies, and in fact he used that as a major platform in his campaign, saying he will stand up to their allies when he thinks they are wrong. He's also pledged to deepen relations with Russian President Vladimir Putin, and he was one of the first to congratulate Erdogan, referring to him as a dear friend. That will raise eyebrows both in Europe and in Washington.
DW's Dorian Jones in Istanbul. Thank you. Hakatash is a research fellow at the Giga Institute of Middle East Studies. Welcome. Firstly, is there any truth to Erdogan's rivals' claims that this was the most unfair election in years?
It is definitely an unfree and unfair election. We should also add the unfree as well, because several politicians, for instance, like Süleyman Demirtaş, is still in jail. Another potential candidate, Ekrem Davutoğlu, faced legal cases. So it is also unfree and unfair election. I mean, in Turkey, Erdogan cannot afford losing the game, but he also needs the electoral legitimacy. This is why we see high level of contention or contentiousness in elections, but the regime also creates a highly tilted playing field to make it very difficult for the opposition. I mean, many people call Turkey a competitive authoritarian regime, but the adjective competitive comes only because the resilience of the political and social opposition. I mean, we are talking about a country governed by one man for over 20 years, with almost no free mass media, state resources under the control of the political leader without checks and balances, the leader of the second biggest opposition party in jail, civil society and academia under constant threat. So I think it is fair to call Turkish elections an unfree and unfair election.
At the same time, nearly half the voters didn't want another 5 years of Erdogan. So what's this win mean moving forward for human rights, press freedom, as you mentioned, women, the LGBT community?
Yeah. I mean, crackdown over the opposition, the human rights activism, that is now the default order of the things. I mean, we shouldn't call it in waves of crackdown, but it is more like the default things of order in Turkey at the moment. And if you check Erdogan's balcony speech, he kept calling the opposition as terrorists as well. And for the other 50%, I think, Turkey might be more difficult to live in. I mean, with the refugee deal between Turkey and European leaders, I mean, Europe managed to stop the influx of the Syrian refugees, but they can rightly expect the influx of some Turkish and Kurdish refugees now.
In recent years, Erdogan's government has shifted from Western allies to other partners. Russia's President Putin was among the first to congratulate him. In terms of foreign policy, what can the West expect in the coming years?
I think the same things will hold on. I mean, during the election campaign, anti-Western discourse overwhelmed the election campaign, as even the Turkish Interior Minister Süleyman Soylu said that individuals who conduct a US-oriented policy will be deemed traitors. Especially in this parliament, Erdogan's AKP fell from 42% in the previous election to 35%, which means he's more dependent on his nationalist allies. But still, instead of grand imperial visions of Turkey in the past, we'll see efforts to save the day. So a transactional approach with Turkey's relations with the EU will continue. That holds for Syria and refugees. As far as Sweden is concerned, Erdogan already made it clear that Turkey is not ready for Sweden's entrance into the NATO, which means there will be some spoils expected on that regard. But as you mentioned, at the moment, Turkey is quite reliant on the loans coming from Russia and the Gulf countries. In the Balkan speech, Qatar and Russia were the two only countries that were mentioned deliberately by Erdogan. So especially considering the looming economic crisis or the ongoing currency crisis, this dependence on Russia or improved relations with Russia and the Gulf countries could be expected.
Hakatash from the Giga Institute of Middle East Studies, thank you very much for coming on DW.
Thank you too.